Palestinian resistance groups strike the heart of the Zionist regime as rockets hit Haifa and occupied Al-Quds. Israeli aggression against the Gaza Strip claimed 17 Palestinian lives, leaving over 100 injured. And the gloves come off. The Israeli premier orders occupation forces to be ready for a possible ground incursion into Gaza. Hello there, you're watching Ali Tijah World News and I'm Fatima Bassem. In a series of major operations against Israeli occupation forces, Palestinian resistance factions have responded to the ongoing Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip. The resistance groups launched a total of 130 rockets into Israeli territory, hitting the heart of the Zionist regime, including the cities of occupied Al-Quds and Haifa. In one of the assaults, 8 missiles were launched, 3 of which hit targets in Al-Quds, while a number of missiles launched at Tel Aviv were intercepted by the so-called Iron Dome missile defense system. Meanwhile, the military wing of Hamas, the Al-Qassam brigades, launched incursions into the Israeli city of Ashkelon, reportedly killing at least 7 Israeli soldiers. Well, it's the latest act of aggression on the part of the Israelis against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. This was the scene in Gaza earlier today when Israeli jets pounded targets along the coastal strip in the early hours of the morning as people geared up for their day-long fast during the holy month of Ramadan. Dozens of airstrikes were launched, completely demolishing houses in densely populated residential areas. The assault left at least 16 Palestinians dead and over 100 others injured. In one of the attacks, 5 members of a single family, including 2 children, were slaughtered. Balsam Al-Atrash found this report from the besieged enclave.
After announcing the beginning of military operations in a campaign dubbed the so-called Protective Edge against Gaza, Israeli warplanes launched more than 80 airstrikes on the besieged enclave. The attacks targeted 5 houses belonging to resistance fighters, rocket launching sites, and open areas. Tens of Palestinians were killed in the latest acts of Zionists' aggression. 10 children and 2 women were among 100 people wounded, 2 of whom remain in serious condition.
We have announced a medical emergency for all our teams to respond to medical conditions on the field. We were informed by the Israeli occupation through phone to evacuate our homes. All of us ran out of the house, and after exactly 7 minutes, the F-16 fired a rocket which hit the house. It wasn't a normal rocket, it felt like an explosive barrel. Our house and the nearby houses were damaged.
In retaliation, more than 30 rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip towards southern occupied Israeli territory over a period of 30 minutes. And a volley of another 70 missiles were fired throughout the day. 1 Israeli sustained shrapnel wounds in Ashdod. The heavy rocket barrage led to a suspension of the rail service in the southern occupied territories. Residents of towns in the southern Israeli settlements close to the Gaza Strip were also warned to stay 15 seconds from the bomb shelters at all times. Hamas has claimed responsibility for the heavy rocket fire as code red sirens blared across the south in towns and cities including Ashkelon, Kiryat Malachi, Ashdod, Netivot, and Beersheba. The Iron Dome missile defense system shot down a total of 12 rockets near Netivot and Ashdod. Islamic Jihad movement, for their part, claimed responsibility for firing at least 60 rockets towards southern Israeli settlements.
If the occupation feels that it's free to do what it wants, it is mistaken. The occupation is disillusioned. The resistance will not stand by idly. What the resistance group has carried out in the past 24 hours is proof that it is capable of hurting the enemy and stopping these aggressive airstrikes.
It was the most serious flare-up in and around the territory since November 2012 and came as the Israeli entity struggled to contain a wave of violence in Palestinian towns over the grisly murder of a Palestinian teenager by Jewish extremists. Israeli officials have also announced that occupation forces will carry out more air raids on the Gaza Strip and call up 1,500 reservists for a potential ground operation as the Israelis move closer to a third major offensive in the Palestinian territory in 6 years.
True, there has been an escalation, clearly a strong one. Parties are not interested to lose control of the situation. Hamas has its conditions and Islamic Jihad as well. The Israeli entity main objective is to stop the rockets. All it wants is to stop the rockets. However, the number of mutual hits between both sides in the past 24 hours says that both sides are beginning to lose control. One mistake is enough to turn over the equation and drag the area to a larger front, new confrontation and stronger escalation between Palestinians and Israelis.
Hamas, for its part, announced that the Israeli entity had crossed the red line and would pay the price, warning the Israeli occupation that if their wave of aggression does not stop, it would respond by enlarging the radius of their targets to the point where the enemy will be surprised. It appears that the escalation in the Gaza Strip over the past few days by the Israelis was no more than a prelude to a wider and stronger military operation, including a potential ground attack on the already besieged enclave. Balsam Al-Atrash, Litijah TV, Gaza.
All right, let's now bring in Balsam Al-Atrash, who is with us over the phone. Balsam, let's start with those ongoing Israeli airstrikes. What's the latest? Balsam, can you hear me? I'm going to repeat the question. Let's start with those ongoing Israeli airstrikes. What's the latest? Well, we seem to have lost our correspondent in Gaza. Moving on. During a meeting at the Israeli War Ministry, Benjamin Netanyahu ordered occupation forces to take off the gloves in their confrontation with Hamas, which he said will pay a heavy price as he instructed troops to prepare for a possible military incursion on Gaza. A senior Israeli official stated that the Prime Minister instructed the army to be ready to go all in. A ground offensive is on the table. The Prime Minister's instruction by the end of the meeting was to prepare for a thorough, long, continuous and strong campaign in Gaza. The Israeli War Minister Moshe Yaalon, for his part, said that the Israelis are ready to expand their offensive against Gaza to punish the Palestinian resistance group Hamas. Yaalon said, "We are prepared for an offensive against Hamas, which will not end in a couple of days, will not tolerate rocket fire, and we are prepared to expand the operation and to exact a heavy toll on Hamas." This as the Israeli cabinet has authorized the mobilization of up to 40,000 additional reservists as it intensifies its offensive against the Gaza Strip. Israeli officials claimed that there were no immediate plans to call up the reservists, but that the order would serve as a backup plan in the event of an offensive expansion. Around 1,500 reservists were called up on Monday as reinforcement for the troops amassing on the border fence separating the occupied territories from Gaza. Let's now go back with our Gaza correspondent, Balsam Al-Atrash. Balsam, tell us more about the ongoing Israeli airstrikes. What is the latest?
Yes, the latest, the situation in Gaza is escalating rapidly. More than 30 targets have been hit in the past hour, with both warplanes in the air and warships from the sea targeting all the Gaza Strip. Just now, there was an airstrike on a poultry farm in Khan Yunis. Injuries have been confirmed, but we are still waiting for the updates from the medics on the number of injuries or killed Palestinians. Also, another strike just hit Al-Zawaida area. No injuries reported. But let's talk about the other side of Palestine. More than half of occupied Palestine is under Hamas rocket attack from Beersheba up to occupied Tel Aviv. Hamas has broadened its massive rocket attack. The resistance rockets for the first time reached 200 kilometers and hit Haifa. The occupation admitted directly the hit of a home in the settlements of Beersheba. This is west of Jerusalem. Also, settlements in occupied Al-Quds were hit with 8 Palestinian rockets. Al-Quds brigades bombed Ben Gurion airport also with rockets as well. Hamas seems to keep its promise to surprise the enemy, and the Palestinian resistance continues to escalate the bombing of towns and cities in the occupied territories of year 48. Hamas said it fired 2 rockets at Israeli army bases as well.
All right, thank you for giving us the latest in Gaza. Let's speak to Ben Jamal. He is a member of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. Mr. Jamal, the Palestinian resistance seems defiant, but will it be enough to deter Israeli aggression?
Well, I mean, I guess history would tell us no. If we think back to the last major ground invasion in 2009, cast lead, we're seeing all the signs, I think, of Israel preparing to do something similar to what it did in 2009, which, as your viewers will recall, led to the death of over 1,500 Palestinian civilians in a period of less than 3 weeks.
Yes, and where does the Palestinian Authority stand in all of this? Even though it has condemned Israeli aggressions, it hasn't done anything to stop them.
Well, I mean, we have to look at the balance of power here, don't we? I mean, Israel wants people to think, particularly people in the West, and this is what we're seeing in the media over here in London. It wants people to think that the sort of clock started ticking on all of this only when rocket attacks began to escalate in response to Israel's actions in the West Bank. But the reality is all of this is occurring obviously in the context of Israel's ongoing occupation and an enormous imbalance of power between Israel and the occupied Palestinian people.
Yes, and will the current crisis create another intifada? Haven't Palestinians had enough of this?
I mean, I think all the conditions are probably there for another intifada. People have been saying this, you know, friends and colleagues that I've spoken to in Palestine, commentators have been saying for some years about the potential for another intifada. At the moment, obviously, the issue for the people in Gaza is to try to and who knows what's going to happen in the next few days, unless serious pressure is put on the Israeli government needs to come from outside powers to stop its attacks.
Yes, and Netanyahu has faced tension recently from both his partners in cabinet, from the Israeli Beitanu party and the Yesh Atid. Will this incursion give him a cause to unite the fragmented government?
I guess again, history tells us that very often, I don't think this is the cause, but one of the consequences of severe incursions like this on the part of Israel is that it tends to unite all forces in Israel behind the government. And certainly, I think extremely sadly, the evidence with the Israeli population is supporting the action that's currently being taken.
Yes, and you mentioned there that outside players should pressure the Israeli entity. How will Egypt play a role in this? It has been a broker in the past, but it has blacklisted Hamas.
Yeah, I think that's a very difficult one to read. I mean, we had reports in the last couple of weeks that there was attempts that people believed, or has been reported, were being successful on the part of the Israeli government to broker a ceasefire. But obviously, the current Egyptian government, is no friend of Hamas, and some would say no friend of the Palestinian people. We have to recall that the siege of Gaza is also being imposed by the Egyptian government as well.
All right, Ben Jamal, member of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, thank you for sharing your thoughts on this.
Thank you.
The recent escalation in violence along the Gaza Strip is an extension of the decades-long Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israeli aggression against the coastal enclave has never really ended, with military offensives only changing in name. But the gruesome and indiscriminate killing of Palestinian civilians by occupation forces also highlights the failure on the part of the Israelis to suppress Palestinian resistance groups.
Even though Israeli aggression against Palestinians has been an almost daily occurrence since the Israeli occupation of Palestine in 1948, 2006 marked the first large-scale Israeli military incursion into the Gaza Strip since occupation forces withdrew from the coastal enclave a year earlier. In late June of 2006, thousands of Zionist forces mobilized along the border fence with the Gaza Strip after Israeli Corporal Gilad Shalit was captured by the Palestinian resistance groups. An estimated 7,000 to 9,000 Israeli artillery shells were fired into Gaza, killing 80 Palestinians in 6 months. In response, Palestinian resistance groups fired over 1,300 Qassam rockets into occupied Palestine, destroying targets in developed cities. Later in November, a ceasefire was signed, leading to another subsequent Israeli withdrawal. However, only 2 years later, in February 2008, the Israeli military initiated Operation Hot Winter under the pretext of curbing Qassam rocket attacks fired by Palestinian resistance groups. 112 Palestinians were killed during that offensive, with more than 150 others injured. The violence ended with another Egyptian brokered ceasefire between the Israeli entity and Hamas, which went into effect in June 2008. The Zionist regime did not respect the terms of the ceasefire, however, with reports of ongoing offensives continuing. But perhaps the worst violence witnessed in Gaza since 2005 was the Gaza War. It began when the Israeli entity launched a military offensive in the Gaza Strip on December 27, 2008, codenamed Operation Cast Lead. Intense bombardment of the Gaza Strip targeting mosques, medical facilities and schools led to the death of an estimated 1,700 Palestinians. That conflict ended on January 18 after another round of unilateral ceasefires was announced. On January 21, the Israelis completed their withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, but not for long. During the second week of March 2012, Israeli occupation forces initiated Operation Returning Echo. It was the worst outbreak of violence covered by the media in the region since Operation Cast Lead. Attacks against the besieged enclave intensified late in October 2012, and at least 200 Palestinians were killed, most of whom were women and children. Now in 2014, the Israelis have once again launched a military offensive against Gaza, dubbed Operation Protective Edge, and the death toll, which already stands at 6, is set to rise. Though the names of the Israeli entity's offensives against Gaza may change, the Israeli entity's aggression has not ceased to exist, perhaps a sign of failure, with the mounting strength of Palestinian resistance groups.
The Iraqi army is preparing to launch a major military operation in Tikrit in a bid to retake the northern city from militants belonging to the so-called Islamic State. The latest preparations come following a week of advances by the Iraqi army in the surrounding areas.
The Iraqi army is preparing to reclaim the northern city of Tikrit from Islamic State militants who seized Salahuddin's provincial capital last month. For 10 days now, Iraqi troops, with the help of thousands of volunteers, have been securing areas around Tikrit, including Awaja, the hometown of former dictator Saddam Hussein. Before entering the militant stronghold, the military warned civilians to flee the area.
Security forces are determined, God willing, very shortly to enter Tikrit and cause as little civilian casualties as possible. The main target is to avoid casualties among civilians and avoid damage to the infrastructure, houses of the civilians and other vital installations. And in order to achieve this aim, the security forces have appealed to the dear citizens of Tikrit to stay in their homes and to provide any information to the security forces.
Meanwhile, government troops were engaged in another battle further west in Fallujah, where they managed to root out IS militants from the Salamiyah area. In a show of support for the country's soldiers, Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki attended the funeral procession of a senior Iraqi general killed on Monday by insurgents near the capital, Baghdad. As Iraqi officials are set to meet this Sunday in their ongoing effort to form a government, any military successes on the ground are likely to translate into political victories for Maliki in his quest to restore stability to the country.
You're watching AEE TV World News, still to come. Afghanistan's Abdullah contests the result of the country's presidential runoff, calling the vote rigged. Welcome back to AEE TV World News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Palestinian resistance groups strike the heart of the Zionist regime as rockets hit Haifa and occupied Al-Quds. Israeli aggression against the Gaza Strip claims 17 Palestinian lives, leaving over 100 injured. And the gloves come off. The Israeli premier orders occupation forces to be ready for a possible ground incursion into Gaza. As the Ukrainian government gears up to take back the eastern cities of Luhansk and Donetsk, a humanitarian crisis is looming. This as diplomatic efforts continued in a bid to bring about a political solution to the conflict.
Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko's push to assert Kiev's authority over the east has hit civilians harder than pro-Russian rebels.
I am for peace talks. I don't wish anything bad to either of the two sides. I wish everything would be resolved peacefully. Life is more valuable than useless fights on both sides.
Aside from the ongoing shelling, The two biggest towns in the country's east now fear that if the siege develops, they will have a major humanitarian crisis on their hands. Local residents say they worry about food, water and electricity, which have already become scarce in the besieged areas. It is also unclear how local hospitals and medical institutions will be able to function in Donetsk and Luhansk during the siege. But peace is still a long way off, with both sides failing to agree on a diplomatic solution. Newly appointed Ukrainian Defense Minister Valery Galetti said that Kiev would not declare a new ceasefire in eastern Ukraine unless the anti-Kiev activists surrendered their weapons. However, the response was already apparent among pro-Russian activists, who were already regrouping to regain their former stronghold in Slavyansk, which is now under the government's control following heavy shelling last week.
In any case, it will be us who will announce any talks. It means we will not accept the previous scenario, when we agreed and ceasefire unilaterally, while the Ukrainian soldiers deployed their troops. This time, if there are any negotiations, they will be held on our conditions.
Meanwhile, on the diplomatic front, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko met with Italian Foreign Minister Federica Mogherini in Kiev on Tuesday to discuss the latest unrest in the country.
We need a consistent and clear signal, including from the Russian Federation, that the separatists will talk to reach a bilateral ceasefire. The Trilateral Contact Group is trying to do everything possible to continue this rather difficult dialogue to save people's lives.
Now, as the government in Kiev gears up for an ambitious plan to retake the main cities in the east, the rebels are expected to put up a fight in what marks the latest twist in the Ukraine saga.
The Bahraini government has ordered U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy and Human Rights, Tom Malinowski, to leave the country following his meeting with opposition figures. A statement released by the Foreign Ministry said that the U.S. diplomat was unwelcome in the Persian Gulf country, claiming that he interfered in Bahrain's interior affairs by holding meetings with members of the Al-Wifaq opposition group. Washington has expressed deep concern over the expulsion, which was also condemned by a host of international human rights organizations. Bahrain continues to face almost daily protests after more than 3 years since an uprising began demanding the fall of the Al Khalifa monarchy, as well as political and social reforms. Amid ongoing nuclear talks between world powers and Tehran in Vienna, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei stressed that his country's negotiating team will defend the rights of the Iranian nation, adding that no country can afford to launch a military attack against Iran. Sayyid Khamenei said that the reason for the US prevention of an Israeli attack against Iran is that it does not see the attack as affordable, and we also strongly emphasize that a military attack on the Islamic Republic is not affordable for anyone. The enemy's hand is empty in both fields of sanctions and threats. Sayyid Khamenei also added that we trust the negotiating team and are sure they will not allow anyone to harm the nation's nuclear rights. The future needs of the country must be taken into account in these talks.
The sixth round of nuclear talks between Tehran and the P5+1 group of countries headed by Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif and EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton kicked off in Vienna last week. So far, little progress has been made, with officials from both sides stating that disagreements persist, stemming from Western attempts to exert pressure on the Islamic Republic into making concessions. For his part, the US President Barack Obama once again repeated his anti-Iran warmongering rhetoric. In an exclusive interview with Israeli newspaper Haaretz, Obama said that Washington is determined to prevent Iran from what he called obtaining a nuclear weapon, saying that the White House is keeping all options on the table to accomplish that goal. Tehran has made it clear all along that its nuclear program is strictly for peaceful purposes, which has been backed by numerous UN reports. According to diplomats, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and other foreign ministers may travel to Vienna in the coming days. Yet they caution that the possible arrival of the ministers should not be seen as proof that negotiators are on the cusp of a deal.
That's great.
Iran and the P5+1 group have less than 2 weeks to bridge the gap over the future scope of Tehran's enrichment program and other issues, if they are to meet a self-imposed July 20th deadline.
At least 10 civilians, 2 Afghan policemen and 4 NATO soldiers were killed in a suicide bomb blast in Afghanistan's east. The Taliban claimed responsibility for the attack, saying one of its suicide bombers had blown himself up near a NATO patrol in the province of Parwan, north of the capital, Kabul. Meanwhile, Afghan presidential candidate Ashraf Ghani has won the country's heavily contested presidential election, according to preliminary results which were announced yesterday. However, his sole rival Abdullah rejected the outcome and instead claimed victory for himself.
Afghan presidential candidate Abdullah claimed victory in Afghanistan's disputed election, insisting fraud plagued the poll and led to the Electoral Commission announcing Ashraf Ghani as the winner. Abdullah called for patience from loyalists who demanded he declare a parallel government to rule the country.
We are proud. We respect the votes of the people. We were the winners. We will not accept a fraudulent result. Not today, not tomorrow, never.
In contrast, Ashraf Ghani welcomed the announcement as his supporters celebrated in the capital Kabul. Fraud allegations immediately sparked a dispute and stoked concerns of instability after the figures showed Ghani collecting 56.4% of the runoff vote against ex-Foreign Minister Abdullah's 43.5%. Earlier, US Secretary of State John Kerry said his country expects Afghan electoral institutions to conduct a full review of, quote, all reasonable allegations of irregularities, while warning that any attempts to take power illegally will cost Afghanistan the support of the United States. Abdullah has called for the country to remain unified as it faces a difficult transfer of power after President Hamid Karzai's 13-year reign. The election standoff has raised fears of ethnic unrest and a return to the conflict between warlords that ravaged Afghanistan during the 1992-1996 civil war.
Let's now speak to political analyst Saeed Andrabi. Mr. Andrabi, how far do you think Abdullah will take his demands for presidency?
Yeah, thanks for getting me on the show. I think he will persist because he has long-standing grievances. In 2009, also he thought there was a fraud. And this time, in the first round, he had a sort of clear majority and a clear edge over the others. But now it seems he's trailing behind as the preliminary results show. So I think he won't take it that easily, and he might persist in his resistance. And already his supporters are talking about setting up a parallel government. That may or may not happen, but there is one thing is definite, that Afghanistan is set for a big instability and again a friction between the political powers. And the ugly thing about it is, the thing that worries is that it's not merely a political struggle. All the political forces in Afghanistan, they have their own warlords, and it could turn violent, and we might see things again reverting back to violence.
Are the Americans essentially endorsing Ghani by warning to stop supporting Kabul if the results are contested?
They are playing a double game. They are saying that the grievances should be looked into, and some polling booths, some votes should be again counted and audited, and that way they are endorsing that the elections may not have been fair. There might have been some irregularity, but on the other hand, they have made it clear that if there's any parallel government, if there's any such thing, they will cut off both the military and economic aid, which Afghanistan cannot afford. So John Kerry has made it very clear in a blunt statement. So that means any moves from Abdullah to persist and dig in, it will not be encouraged by US, and they won't support it. So naturally, what US will do will amounts to supporting instability and infighting in Afghanistan.
Do you think much will change under Ashraf Ghani? He has vowed to bring back stability to Afghanistan.
Sorry, say again?
Do you think much will change under Ashraf Ghani's rule? He has vowed to bring back stability to Afghanistan.
I don't think much would change. We have seen what the previous president Karzai has been able to do, because the president goes in the presidential palace and that's it. We have to see the situation on the ground, the forces on the ground. There are Taliban and there are unless there's a comprehensive settlement wherein all the stakeholders are co-opted and they reach some sort of settlement, nothing can be done. The president goes and he has an executive power, and that power has its own limits. I don't think Ashraf Ghani can do much more than what Karzai could do.
All right, political analyst Said Andrabi, thank you for sharing your thoughts on this.
Thanks. Right.
Yemen's Houthi fighters have taken full control of Amran city following fierce clashes with pro-government Takfiri militants. This as Yemeni warplanes launched fresh airstrikes on Houthi positions in and around the northern city.
Yemen's northern city of Amran has fallen in the hands of Houthi fighters as clashes intensified between Houthi rebels and military forces on the one hand and allied Takfiri Islah militants on the other, further destabilizing the country and leaving any talk of a ceasefire in tatters. The Houthis, also known as Ansarullah, have advanced from their mountain strongholds towards the capital Sana'a in recent days, driving out Takfiri militants from the area in a suspected attempt to expand their sphere of influence. Meanwhile, the Yemeni Air Force launched fresh raids on Houthi positions in and around Amran, resulting in multiple casualties. The latest round of violence has left dozens dead. A local hospital reported the admission of 120 people among the dead and injured, while thousands of residents in Amran were forced to flee the city to neighboring towns. Yemen's Houthi movement, which draws its name from its founder Hussein Badruddin al-Houthi, has been fighting the central government for years. Houthis blame the government for political, economic and religious marginalization of the country's Shia community and violation of civil rights. The fall of Amran will give the Houthis huge momentum on the road to the capital Sana'a as the defenses of the army and tribal forces continues to collapse. An end to the ongoing unrest in the north seems far from being reached, as the movement claims that the government's failure to commit to a ceasefire has made any political settlement to the crisis almost impossible.
Sudan is a place where urban development never stops. Our Khartoum correspondent gives us a look now at the traditional Sudanese method of making bricks, which is an essential part of the urbanization process.
Urban development never stops. Interestingly enough, a traditional method of making bricks using an assortment of materials for the construction of new buildings is an essential part of such an expansion.
We smash the rocks and mud blocks and we add oil and animal waste to the mix. Then we add water through pumps from the River Nile and we leave the mix for a while so it could blend well.
These materials are mixed together. Then the melange is evenly spread across the ground, cut into rectangular pieces by the workers and then left to dry in the sun. From there, the bricks are taken to the next stage.
We find the raw square-shaped bricks ready. We build a structure of mud known as agate into which we arrange the raw bricks into rows and columns with holes in between known as eyes, through which the fire lit underneath can permeate. This structure is a traditional furnace which renders the bricks ready.
These steps are carried out in what is known as a kamina, a traditional factory for different types of mud. A kamina is basically a hole in the ground, but a big one. It's square-shaped and usually located by the River Nile, where the mud is best suited for making bricks.
Here, it is good mud. It requires less heat to solidify into bricks.
The construction of upscale neighborhoods as well as one-story buildings is dependent upon the usage of bricks manufactured in this manner. However, a few other types of bricks are also emerging in the market. Ahmed Saeed Ahmed, Al-Ittijah News Channel, Khartoum.
Two star players, two teams and two dreams. The Netherlands will take on Argentina in the World Cup semi-finals on Wednesday, with both sides ready to battle it out for a place in the final.
Argentina's been waiting 24 long years for this moment. They finally made it back to the World Cup semi-finals where they'll take on the Netherlands. Expectations are colossal both back home and in Brazil, where thousands of fans have travelled to cheer them on. Collectively, the sides failed to shine so far in the competition, prompting criticism they're overly dependent on four-time World Player of the Year Lionel Messi. But it was Gonzalo Higuain who scored the all-important goal against Belgium in the quarter-finals to see Argentina through with a 1-0 win. And with key midfielder Angel Di Maria injured, the side must prove more than ever they're more than a one-man team.
We're facing a very experienced side that got to the last World Cup final, so we know they'll be hungry to win and make up for what happened in South Africa. So it will be a very difficult match, like they've all been so far. We don't want an easy game. It's a World Cup semi-final.
And it's not just that 2010 defeat to Spain that the Dutch will be looking to make up for. Overall, the Netherlands have played in 3 World Cup finals and 3 times they've lost. Louis van Gaal's side will be counting on their own star striker Arjen Robben's current fine form to put an end to their spell of bad luck.
The players we've got, we're fit. I think we're fitter than most teams in this World Cup. And like I said, we can be confident, and it's going to be a fantastic game.
So the Netherlands confident they can go all the way, while Argentina are hoping to lift the trophy for the first time since 1986. Something has to give, as both sides look to end decades of World Cup disappointment.
The sport of gassing uri, which involves sending a meticulously handcrafted disc of wood and tin spinning for up to 2 hours, is struggling to attract new players in Malaysia and prompted some to fear it may die out.
A centuries-old Malaysian competition that many here call their World Cup. The name of the sport is gassing uri, which literally means flying top.
The person who catches, that's the most difficult job. It's like football. The goalie is the most important. The person who is catching needs to know the person who is spinning, where the gassing is going to go.
The sport is thought to have started as a way for man to pass the time once the rice harvest was over. And time is certainly needed. This is hardly edge-of-your-seat action, with tops often spinning for hours. The winner is the person whose flying top stays up the longest.
It requires them several years to be skillful with the game. It depends on their interest also, because they need to practice, regularly.
In the past, local shamans would first call upon spirits to guide the spinning tops. But a recent deepening of Islamic conservatism means that today that is frowned upon.
Now the Malay Muslim community is seeing little by little how it's contrary to the religion. Malays don't practice the spiritual aspects anymore.
Many fear this ancient tradition might soon die out. Today, few are taking up this slow-burning sport. a hard sell for often impatient younger generations.
Here's a reminder of our top stories. Palestinian resistance groups strike the heart of the Zionist regime as rockets hit Haifa and occupied Al-Quds. Israeli aggression against the Gaza Strip claims 17 Palestinian lives, leaving over 100 injured. And the gloves come off. The Israeli premier orders occupation forces to be ready for a possible ground incursion into Gaza. Well, that's all from me and the Al Shia News team. Thank you for watching and good night.